It's my pleasure to introduce our three panelists for today. First up, we have Wayne Hoyle, the Director of Business Development from MDA. It's a nice long walk for us here.
Yeah.
Then we've got Adrian McCardle. He's the President from 3V Geomatics. And last but not least, Keith Beckett, the Chief Scientist from UrTheCast Observation. Perfect. So I think we're going to have just a little bit of a conversation here today, hopefully dig in a little bit to what's happening. And from my perspective, it's really important to understand that whether we're talking about prediction, tracking biodiversity, monitoring natural disasters, monitoring the locations of physical objects, we've got this real continuous stream of detail about what's happening on our planet that's now being enabled by the satellite technologies. And what many people might not know is that many of these technologies are really being developed here in our own backyard. So I think with end users in the public sector and the private sector really using data that's been gathered from the satellites and other sensors in space that we're using to really understand what's happening here, there's a desire to understand more among the people here what's really happening in this industry, why it's being shaped here. And I think that the other component is that, like many of the technologies that we're talking about at this conference, these technologies produce this huge amount of data, and that combing through some of that data is really one of the most important things that we do. So I'd love to be able to go into, first of all, just a little bit of detail framing what this industry is and what's happening. I'm going to start off with Keith and really ask him, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role at UrTheCast and tell us the context for why this Earth observation stuff is happening here in Canada and what it really means.
Sure, thank you. Let's start with a little bit of context. So everyone's familiar now with Google Maps and satellite imagery through Google Maps. I've had a hand in that from my previous career at MDA, and so that was something that was very interesting to me at that time. In many ways, Google Maps helped me explain what I do in terms of Earth observation with my friends, colleagues, and whatnot. And for those who saw the movie Lion, you're familiar maybe with Saroo Brierley, who used Google Maps to find his way home across India. It was an interesting story, and it was a movie that came out at the end of last year. So I thought that was quite a nice way of kind of setting the context for this. Today, there's well over 100 satellites in orbit right now, and probably several hundred still waiting in the wings to be launched. Last month, there was 104 satellites launched from a single rocket, and so maybe some people have heard about that in the news recently. We're in the process right now of building 24 more satellites to add to that. And basically, Earth observation from space has become almost routine, I'd say. And it serves many, many applications these days. We've heard today on the stage people talk about forestry and agriculture, for example, and how monitoring global climate change is very important. We heard people talk about, for example, first responders. I heard some people talking about that today. Also, satellites are used to help monitor some of the illegal activities, fishing, logging, other things there. So Canada's been a pioneer really in space for almost 40 years, especially in terms of radar in space. 40 years ago, this was when the first CSAT's a radar satellite that was put on orbit nearly 40 years ago. And this is where the hub of developing processing for it, the first digital SAR processor was developed here in Vancouver. In 1995, RadarSat 1 was launched, and in late 2007, we launched RadarSat 2. Wayne's going to talk a little bit about the RadarSat Constellation mission, which is to follow on to that very successful series of radar satellites. In a sense, we have a history here of building up in the Lower Mainland here, especially here in Vancouver, a sort of center of excellence in radar technology. And through that, we've developed an interesting microcosm here of highly specialized engineers, software developers, and what's now starting to grow here is what I'll call data scientists. And we've heard some people talk about data science here on the stage this morning. If I kind of try to relate this to kind of what we see as trends, let me talk about trends for a little bit. We're all familiar with GPS. It's become ubiquitous as part of our cell phone, our smartphones. whatnot. But that's come from a long cycle of GPS and combining other technologies and other technologies to finally build these kind of location-based apps, we call them. We see another wave of these kind of applications coming along, which are based on Earth observation data and what one can do with that. And so in that context, my role here as chief scientist here at UrTheCast is really to understand how things work so that I can take them apart and understand what the transform is from different steps and how that really works together. And really, I kind of talk to what I call the art of the possible. What is possible from Earth observation data? What can I do? What information can I extract from that? And as part of that role, I lead sort of a technology roadmap here at UrTheCast. And that covers everything from the time when we illuminate the Earth with some kind of light source or some other kind of energy source to the point where we turn that information into some action at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Adrian, I'd love to continue the conversation with you and to talk a little bit about the pace of change in this industry. My involvement, it goes back about 7 years, and I know the old joke was, you can put anything in space as long as it's already been to space, and that really created a bit of a bottleneck in terms of the pace of change, but it seems that that's turned around and that we're getting much faster growth now. Can you speak a little bit to what's happening in this industry?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I mean, that's a great point. I've had some visuals here. My fault, forgot to get this. Oh.
It's in front of you now.
Yeah, okay. So what our company does at 3V Geomatics, we look to extract valuable information from radar satellites. So what I mean by this is the satellite will pass over the same site multiple times, and each time we will process those images to see what the difference is between those images. So it's a technology that we're developing called InSAR, and we can see down to a few millimeters of change or movement of the ground or of a piece of infrastructure, and we can determine if an area is risky or not. A good example I have behind me there is a Burkholder Mountain, which isn't too far from Lillooet. Now this is a pretty remote area, but we're still able to see those areas in red and orange. Those are areas of landslides. No one has to go to the field. That's a real strength of the technology. We can cover hundreds of square kilometers with a single image and monitoring program, and we can get that very, very detailed information. So if someone does have to go to the field, like you see here, they know exactly where to look for those risks. If they're planning a road or even hiking through there, they know where the risks are and in advance. If you look at the way that the technology has developed over the years, we have an image behind me of YVR. So 10 years ago, with that generation of satellites, we had 10-meter resolution was about the best you could get. And we had the choice from about 1 or 2 satellites, and that was it. And so what you see behind me is all those bright dots. Those are areas that we're able to measure. We're measuring that movement on that piece of infrastructure, YVR. Back in those days, we could tell a general idea that there was some movement issues at YVR. But our users had a lot of difficulty making sense of this. It was very vague. It covered a large area. They weren't sure how that impacted them. It was a decent product, but still there was a long way to go in that regard. So we started the company because we felt, first, the data was just awesome. You can measure millimeters from space, 800 kilometers up. It doesn't get any better than that. And we also saw the potential, if we can improve this technology over the next few years, what can we do with that? What applications are possible? So if we fast forward the current generation of satellites, the resolutions that you get are between 1 and 3 meters. So you're starting to see a lot of details. You can see the Canada line, major infrastructure. You can see if there's any movement on those pieces. So an individual infrastructure owner now knows they have a problem. It's a much greater leap to, okay, is this a decision-making tool or not? And so that's a huge leap forward. When we take the next step, this is the same area. It's actually the same data processed with new algorithms that we've developed over the last couple of years. We're now into millions of points over YVR and we have a huge amount of data. We're able to see an individual piece of infrastructure and how that tilts. So it's not just the fact that that infrastructure owner knows they have a problem. Now they have a better idea of maybe what action they can take. We can see that it's moving at the back of our building, and maybe that's related to some activity we have back there, or maybe that's related to some activity a neighbor has done. So those are the applications now someone can now take advantage of. And the other thing that's changed over that time with the satellites available is there's a lot of satellites available now. So a lot of commercial and publicly available data is out there, and the frequency of acquisitions has changed huge. So not only are we seeing a much denser network of information, but the depth is really, really big. That graph that you see on the slide, it's showing all the separate acquisitions. So in a lot of our monitoring programs, we're getting a new measurement every 11 days. You can get as high as every 3 days. When we look back 10 years ago, we were lucky to get an image every month. That was a really good data set for us. And there's a lot can change in between that month, where our users are now wanting to get that data much, much quicker.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And so I'm going to continue on to Wayne and just ask if you can tell us a little bit about where the industry sits today, and specifically, what are the organizations that you work with? What are they getting from this technology? How would they describe that value? Maybe you could go into that a little bit.
Sure. Thank you. I've got some slides that I was going to use as well that will just sort of walk us through a little bit of history with MDA. Initially, see if I can make that work. There you go. Oh, sorry. So MDA was founded, as Keith mentioned, many years ago by John McDonald and Vern Detweiler. And they had a vision of basically creating a transportable ground station. And I think back then there was never the idea that today 7 out of 10 images that you download from Google Earth have come through one of the ground stations that have been built by MDA. Keith knew that. But so really, this is really one of the biggest applications, is how do you get the data off of the satellites and into a usable state. MDA has grown from those early days up to now 4,800 employees across 15 offices in Canada, US, and internationally, and customers throughout the world. Keith sort of touched a little bit on RadarSat, just to give you a bit of an idea. RadarSat 1 was launched in 1995. RadarSat 2 was launched in 2007. And for those that aren't familiar with it, RadarSat is a synthetic aperture radar, C-band. It works in a polar orbit, sun synchronized, and it's 800 kilometers in altitude, which is about from here to Edmonton away. So it's very, very high. Can look at huge areas, about 500 kilometers across for a single image, and give you very, very good resolution. So RadarSat is really the workhorse of what we've been using for a lot of years, and very excited that in 2018 will be the launch of the RadarSat Constellation mission, which is also a C-band SAR satellite. As far as applications as to where exactly is the data used, I've got a few case studies just to walk through. The first one here is looking at illegal fishing off the Ascension Islands. And the Ascensions, for those people that don't know where it's at, it's sort of midway between Africa and South America. It's about 2,200 miles away from Brazil and 1,600 kilometers away from Africa. So it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's about the size of Burnaby, the islands. They've got a 200-kilometer or 200-mile nautical zone around it. And it's got about 800 people on the island. So it's very, very sparsely populated, but lots and lots of fish resources, which attracts the illegal fishers. So the areas I've highlighted there in red are all where we've detected fishing activities based on self-reporting and based on satellite imagery. So we collect the imagery across this huge area and try to detect it. This is really looking at the eastern part of the EEZ, right on the rim of the EEZ there, for a 2-week period, the first 2 weeks of February. And when we do some analysis of it, we see that there's 4 of the ships that are in there were just normal commercial traffic, so tankers or commercial vessels. 3 of them, the orange ones there, are fishing support vessels. So they're either reefer boats, or they're fueling, or they're supply. And 6 were actually reporting that they were fishing vessels. And you can see the tracks that has just come up there, that they go back and forth pretty regularly. The concerning part, though, is 25 of them are unidentified. So there's 25 that are out there trying to operate in a stealth mode. But with radar, we can see them. And of those 25, 3 of them were inside the EEZ. So we can quite quickly go from a place that's out in the middle of nowhere, do this monitoring, and really say, we know you're out there. A second application, which has been used for a lot of years, is detection of pollution at sea. So in this case here, you'll see the red line that's coming out from behind this vessel. It's about 80 kilometers long, so it probably took about 3 hours for them to dump and clean out their bilge tanks and dump the pollution out in the ocean. This is just off of Indonesia, late in November of last year. And again, through the same technology, we can see this and detect it. And one of our customers over in Europe collects the area equivalent to about the size of BC every single day with RadarSat, looking for oil polluters to sort of detect and use that. The next example is also over in Europe, or is in Europe, and it's really using RadarSat to save lives. And in this case, there is an image of where the green box is there, off the Moroccan coast, where they collected imagery looking for migrants. At 6:22 a.m., they collected this image. It got downlinked to a local ground station, processed very, very quickly, and they identified one of the vessels was suspicious. And 72 minutes later, they had a rescue craft pulling 61 migrants off there with an overhead flight, or with an aircraft overhead, basically using this. So every day, RadarSat is being used to help with the migrant crisis over in the Mediterranean. The final one is not so much a real-time activity. Things happen slowly in the ice, but it's monitoring of the ice shelf down in Antarctica. And there's the Larsen C shelf. In the first image here, you'll see that red line across there. That's what we see as a developing crack in the Larsen shelf. First image was collected in January 8th of this year. The second one was collected 16 days later, and you can see the yellow or the orange where the crack has developed and grown. And the third one was collected just a couple weeks ago and shows it growing again. So it looks from the imagery that the crack in this shelf is growing about 1 kilometer a day. Isn't that fast? But in ice, it's pretty quick. Now, fortunately, we're coming up to the winter again, so it'll freeze again down there. But these are 4 applications where RadarSat is used very, very commonly, and I think it's one of the key things that's kept us very, very busy with RadarSat for a lot of years.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think this kind of naturally flows from this, but I think what a lot of people are interested in understanding is where you see this technology going in the next decade, and specifically if there's any particular things that you're really excited about, new features that are going to be coming online based on the work that you're doing. I think all of you have something to say here, so maybe we'll just start over with Keith and then work our way down.
All right, thanks. So here in Vancouver, actually, we're developing our first fully digital, all digital SAR instrument here, actually in Vancouver, in our offices here on West Pender. And together with the SAR, we also have onboard processing. And this is truly groundbreaking. And a lot of this has been enabled by the cell phone industry. They have brought the compute power per watt down into a small package that you can now put safely into your pocket, whereas before it would take up a whole seat, for example. So pretty amazing technology. Our radar that we're developing right now is about a 6,000 watt microwave oven, if you can imagine that. And it operates at 2 wavelengths. And so what's interesting about that is it gives us a very deep understanding of what we're seeing here in the Earth. And for maybe those who are not familiar so much with radar, maybe it's worth taking a step back for a moment and thinking about why is radar here important here? A couple of things. First off, with radar, you can see at night. With optical imagery, you only can see during the day. Radar can also see through clouds, smokes, camouflage, tree cover, and various other things, and actually get some penetration into the surface of the soil. So it's a very ubiquitous remote sensing instrument rather than an optical image which just sees the surface, the very top surface of things. You actually start to understand better about what you're actually looking at there. And as Adrian pointed out, it's very good also at measuring distances. This is how they're measuring, for example, the movement in the top of the airport there out at YVR. In terms of kind of looking forward into a couple of things here, really we're in a situation now of we're drowning in data and lacking or starving for timely information. And so this is where UrTheCast is really trying to advance things, and we're doing the same things here at MDA and other places as well. Of how do we transform this information into, or transform this data into actionable information? And we want to do this in a timely way. No one pays big money for yesterday's weather forecast. That's not very useful. So you want it in a time that you can actually take some action in there. And so a lot of the work that I'm focusing on right now is really solving the big data problem that we've now created. We're drowning in this data. We have this big data problem. And now how do we apply machine learning and artificial intelligence? And there's been a lot of people on this stage today talking about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and big data. Just to kind of give you a scale of the big data that we're talking about. With the constellations that we're talking about petabytes of data per day. There were some speakers on stage talking about 228,000 items per day, and I'm going, you haven't really spoke big data yet.
Yeah.
We're talking scary, scary volumes of data. And this is where the advances need to come along to say, how do we manage that data? How do we process that data? How do we turn that data into actionable information? This is where, for example, quantum computing can come in and play and help us in dealing with those large volumes of data.
Is it even possible to get that scale of data down to Earth at this point?
It is. Yeah. That technology is advancing as well. There's a large network of stations around the world now that we use to bring that data down. Data compression techniques, image compression techniques, again, the cell phone industry, thank you, cell phone industry, for advancing these technologies that we can now bring data down at much higher data rates. On RadarSat 2, its downlink rate is 100 megabits a second.
Yeah, wow.
That sounds fast, right? Compared to your little dial-up on your mobile phone. I mean, technology today now, we're at gigabit now, right. Downlinks. So that's an order of magnitude faster just because we have that much more data and we're pounding down more data. And as we improve resolution, the data volume increases. Yeah. In terms of forecasting where we might see where things are going in the future, I see a bit of a convergence between remote sensing and Internet of Things. Now, I'm not talking about your smart car kind of Internet of Things. Yeah. In farming and agriculture and other mining and other things, we're also instrumenting features on the ground. Yeah. And using imagery, I can relate what I see in the imagery to these sensors on the ground. They're fundamentally both forms of remote sensing in my mind. Having a humidity sensor in an orchard combined with the imagery from space and relating those two helps me understand and interpret that imagery. Oh. And where I see this convergence also happening is kind of in the advanced data handling. Everyone's thinking about data management, data handling, backbones. We had TELUS on stage talking about their fiber backbone for moving data, for example. Getting all that data into some kind of a cloud-based environment, some scalable environment, and then being able to process that is kind of where I see this convergence now starting to happen. And just kind of a little plug for another local company that actually it's kind of interesting to me is Helios Wire, sparked off by our past CEO for UrTheCast. He's started up an IoT company now, but again, space-based.
Nice, just a lot of convergence here.
Exactly.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so I guess building on that theme, it's taking advantage of the opportunity. Yeah, it is scary, as I showed those slides earlier, how our data's exploded. I mean, the data that MDA or UrTheCast downloads, as soon as we touch it, it just explodes again into multiples of that original data size for us to get to our end result. And so you look at, if we processed all of BC 10 years ago with the technology that was available, it would be about, if we did a year of processing, it would take about 40 terabytes or a good desktop these days to hold all that data. Now we're looking at 10 petabytes for that same area. And how do we get something, the challenge, it's not just obviously an EO challenge, but how do we get that valuable information to our users to take advantage of that huge, massive big data problem that we've got. And that's what we're really working on, applying those new technologies to process faster, because it's, as Keith also mentioned, it's not, no one wants to pay for yesterday's news. Traditionally, our tech used to take months to process. Our customers want it in hours now. And it's the same thing that would take months, and this is even 2 years ago. Now we're giving it to them on their smartphone, and they can make an operational decision. Is my mine safe, or is it not? Should I investigate? And that's the kind of data we want to bring down to people very quickly.
Oh, thanks.
Right. Yeah, I've got a couple other slides that I was going to use just to address this. The first one here, that one slide is showing really the location of all the ground systems that we've got out there. And to answer the question, as far as opportunities that this, really the explosion in new satellites brings to a company like MDA, is that we're involved in getting the data off the spacecraft down to Earth. And as Adrian and Keith mentioned, our customers want it fast. It's needed to be timely. And so we've got a very large and ongoing business to try to say, how do we do that? And we're working with a lot of the small startups to try to say, how can we use our technology? We've got a lot of key capabilities in that area. The second part, really, this is really a RadarSat 1 and RadarSat 2 coverage graph that shows the archive as it's grown over the last 2 decades. And it may sound a little bit repetitive to what Keith was mentioning, but the reality is that we are getting and developing a big data problem where a lot of our customers are now saying, how do they take machine learning and say, can I find patterns, can I find trends, can I find useful things in this data set that I couldn't have done with just 1 or 2 years or 1 or 2 samples? And so we've got a lot of that capability and research going on within MDA that's really looking at it, trying to say, how are we going to exploit that with the RadarSat constellation, but also with optical satellites and other data sources as well.
Well, I love that. It really flows nicely into the next thing I was interested in. You mentioned that you work with small startups. We've seen a bunch of students from UBC out in the hallway there. I'd love to understand a little bit where you see the follow-on opportunities here. If we think of your companies really as often providing platforms, it strikes me that there's probably a great opportunity for even a company like my own doing some analysis here. I'm sure there's a lot of other groups that are thinking about this. Where do you see the opportunities to come out of this? And I guess what technology is needed for your business to grow so that you can continue creating those sorts of opportunities? Somewhere in there, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts. Maybe we could start off.
Okay. So I'm interested in a couple of things there. It's really solving the 1 + 1 = 3 equation. That's my day job, is how do I take different pieces of information together and with machine learning and artificial intelligence try to extract that actionable information for it. And just to kind of give a scale of what sort of these applications that we're talking about. So Wayne presented some maritime surveillance stuff. I had a large hand in that when I was at MDA, for example, and it's something that's near and dear to Canada with, ocean to ocean to ocean kind of coverage here. But agriculture is another challenge that we have to face right now. We have a growing population. We're going to hit this 9 billion mark that everyone keeps talking about, and supporting them on less and less arable land. As our population grows and takes over that land, we have less land to grow things. Freshwater is the new oil, as we know nowadays. So as industry, agriculture, human consumption, and pollution reduce that, our ability to replenish that supply is being lost. And so how do we manage that? How do we ration that out, for example? And that's a very important piece of actionable information. The forests, again, these are the lungs of our atmosphere. Climate change, especially here in the northern parts of North America, with global climate change, pests, drought, fires are far more prevalent than they have been in the past. Resources, BC is a very resource-dependent country or province, and so we have a lot of dams, we have a lot of infrastructure, pipelines, transmission lines, and everything else. All of that critical infrastructure needs to be protected. As we become more wired, we become more dependent on these things. So we need to take steps to protect them. What UrTheCast is trying to build right now is kind of what everyone's trying to build. It's the holy grail of kind of a data platform where we can exploit this data and do this at scale. And so I know that MDA is working in this space, we're working in that space, and lots of other players are trying to bring all of this information together to be able to do something useful with it and turn it into that actionable information. So it's today's news, not yesterday's news.
Got it, got it. Adrian, I think you have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, well, we are a value-added provider to these systems, and we take that data and break it out to our users. But from our point of view, the thing that we're constantly working on is going beyond just what's in the EO. We had a customer the other day, yesterday, sent an email saying, okay, you're going to tell us if we have movement on our tailings dam. Are you going to tell if it's dangerous or not? And we said, hell no, we're not going to touch that. but we know people who can, and so we want to team with those people, more traditional engineering, that can take our data, interpret it, and make it, again, another value-added product for a user. Now, that also speaks to what we see as a big thing, is integrating our data. You talk about the IoT, but also more traditional, that maybe not connected devices yet, but you have ground-based measurement systems that are more traditional surveys, combining that with our data to make something more meaningful, again, to that customer. 1 + 1 = 3. And we see a lot of integrating with other expertise areas over the next few years.
Yeah, well, we were talking earlier about the idea of the traditional IoT sensors. Is the industry at a place yet where we should be thinking about satellite data as essentially just being a managed aloft version of a sensor? Is that the kind of thing that we're making available now? Well,
I think so. Like our Earth Daily sensor, that constellation I think of as 6 trillion Internet of Things sensors around the world. On a daily basis, I'm giving you a measurement of that area on the Earth every single day, 6 trillion samples a day. Yeah,
and I'm sure MDA is doing some interesting stuff in this space as well.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with what both Keith and Adrian have said. The big transformation that I've seen over the last couple of years is that we've collected with RadarSat over 500,000 images, and yet most of our customers have decided they don't want images anymore. Mm-hmm. They want data. Yeah. Images are something that you turn into a value-added product. And so the biggest area of growth that I see across the whole industry is how do we turn that information, or how do we turn that data into information, and how do you do it with the shortest time frame possible without a lot of humans in the loop. So basically it's developing algorithms that are going to be smart enough to learn what patterns are anomalous or what patterns are should be drawn to the attention of someone that's interested in security or defense, and trigger an alert to say, there's something odd happening over here, you might want to take a look at it. And that would allow them to then send out people or send out an aircraft or something else to queue other resources to say, go have a look and see what's going on. And that's really one of the big areas that I see coming up.
That's great. Yeah, well, thanks. I think that one of the things that I'm really curious about is understanding, what does the Earth observation industry in BC, obviously we've got some interesting stuff happening here. You've been successful at being able to grow up to this scale, but it strikes me that this is an industry that really is, to a degree, still in its infancy, despite the fact that some of you have been around for 50 years now. So what do we need in order for this industry to grow, and especially to grow here in BC? Anybody who's interested, I think we'll just sort of toss it open.
Well, I can start. From our point of view, we're a relatively small company at 25 people, but we are a niche industry, and despite the fact that you have such a concentration of a business environment, we have MDA, UrTheCast, and our technology InSAR, it's such a hub here commercially, but academically, there's no schools that are putting out, across the country, let alone BC, that are putting out students with any exposure to our technology. So we're forced to do two things. One is to either hire a foreign student who's done a master's or PhD, or we take, which we've been very successful at and we're going to continue to do, take really bright people from either another industry or right out of school and get them to fall in love with our technology, because there's just no one coming out of school with that background, and we would love to see that change. That's a huge difference for us.
Yeah. And I know that many of you probably, specific to satellites, but even with the tech industry in general, happy to hear any thoughts about what we can be doing in order to make sure that this is a great place to continue growing these sorts of companies. Yeah.
I'll just speak to that for a couple of moments. There's a number of things that from MDA's perspective we think are very key to growing it. And One of them is, as Adrian mentioned, really fostering an environment where we get some of the brightest brains thinking that this is a challenging and an interesting area and a growth area for careers. And we do that two ways. Every year we have about 30 co-op students that come through MDA. That gives them a taste of what kind of activities we do. We do more than just the Earth observation side, but that's certainly a big piece. Yep. The other side is that last year we announced that together with SFU we put in a program where we're developing the synthetic aperture radar center of excellence, if you like. And that really is to try to grow some expertise through that, and that's together with the BC Innovation Council as well, and the Canadian Space Agency. So those are two areas where we're trying to sort of insert some early on, plant some early seeds, if you like, in that area. The other thing that we really need as MDA is people. We're in a fortunate position right now where we're growing, and I think that we've got about 1,800 people across Canada working for MDA right now. But if you go onto our website right now, there's 60 job postings. 85% of those are engineering jobs. And the plan is that every quarter we're going to be hiring about 60-odd people. So in the audience here with me today is a couple of guys that are from our recruiting, and they're here primarily to say, if there's people out there looking for interesting challenges, we're a great place to come and work. And that's one of the challenges we have as a BC company, is there's a lot of competition from everybody that we've seen here so far, that are all looking for those brightest brains to come work for them.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a great position for anyone who's here, who's looking for this sort of work and looking to get involved with these industries. What kinds of skill sets do you specifically need? I mean, if I wanted to come and work for you right now, what are the types of skills that you are looking for?
You've heard us talk already about like big data. So big data handling, working in the cloud, that's a very specialized set of skills, and they are in short supply. Machine learning and artificial intelligence is an interesting and maturing technology, but as we try to apply it to different application areas, there's always new science that needs to come out. And so developing that data science, the guy that understands the answer to the question, what is a pixel? This is one of my favorite interview questions when I try to hire someone, is I will ask them what is a pixel, and we'll spend 15 minutes on what is a pixel, and to try to really understand what the information content is in that and how to extract that out through machine learning. As I said earlier, that whole convergence of Internet of Things and remote sensing, understanding the technology that says, how do I get that information? How do I get that better? What other information can I tease out if I do this or do that? So there's a hardware side. So we're looking at the hardware side, we're looking at the software side, and we're looking at the cloud side. And then there's that spark, that BC, made in BC kind of application. What is it that we're trying to solve? Is it a forestry? Is it an agriculture? Is it a water and whatever else? And so it's that combination of things. And as Wayne mentioned, like these centers of excellence, we have SFU, we have at UBC and various other places, where you bring students, industry, R&D, university together. It's an amazing opportunity. We UrTheCast have some interesting collaborations on the go right now that are bringing those together. We've had some really good support both at the federal government and the provincial government when it comes to collaborating with industry. In the past, it's always been, it's our data, we won't share anything with you. Government is now becoming very open with the data and being very sharing with it, and that's really helped advance some of these big data solution things to say, okay, you've got the data, you've got the truth information, here's what my imagery says, how do I put those together? So, kudos to the BC government. Our friend Bill Tam rails about the staffing problems or the talent problems that we have here in BC. We have some real challenges. His latest numbers are pretty scary in terms of how much talent we got to crank out here. So, I liked what Chrissy Clark was saying today about encouraging more co-op students, trying to find that more funding. We've got to keep this engine primed with new talent and fresh talent, not just to fill the roles, but to bring the new ideas as well that we need.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it strikes me that that's a story that I keep hearing here in BC, is the importance of the intersection between academia and government and business to kind of make all this stuff happen. Yeah. So what I'm really hearing sort of from all of you here is that this seems to be an industry that's exploding generally, that it's really growing here in British Columbia, that there's lots of opportunities for people who want to explore this here, and also that even for people who aren't looking to work directly in this industry, that this industry is starting to provide a bit of a platform for other people to get involved, to be able to look at some of these things, which I think makes for a really exciting environment and something that we're probably going to see, I would say, tremendous growth in, both here and providing really opportunities all across Canada. So I'd love to have everyone here sort of join us in thanking Keith, Adrian, and Wayne for their time here today. And we really appreciate seeing where you take this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.